Okay, friends, here we are. We're going to continue now. We're in the Gemini chapter on page 363, and it's the beginning of Esoteric Astrology Adventure number 104A. And we've been looking at the energies of the fifth, fourth, and third rays reaching our planet and involving various of the constellations. We have considered the rays which directly affect our planet, the Earth, which are focused through three ruling planets, and which emanate from certain constellations. So reviewing this just a little bit, we have the planet Mercury. It's the exoteric ruler of Gemini, and it brings into relation the constellations Aries, Virgo, Scorpio, and of course also Gemini, in relation to our Earth via Mercury. We have Venus, which is the esoteric ruler of Gemini. It relates the constellations Taurus, Gemini, Libra, and Capricorn. And this Venus conducts these energies to our Earth. With respect to Earth as the third ray ruler or hierarchical of Gemini, we have a narrow relation connecting the pairs of opposites, Sagittarius, and also Gemini. In the last analysis, the planet is the result or the effect, or should I say, he says here, should I say resultant effect of the ray influence. Just as the human being in the physical body, let's get this here. Human being in the physical body is the effect of the governing rays. So our planet as it is the result of these rays that have been reaching us through the various constellations, but especially through Venus and through Mercury. DK does isolate these three planets, Mercury, Venus, and the Earth, when he talks about light. A certain amount of light reaches the Earth, 3 times more light reaches Venus, 7 times more light reaches Mercury. And I've discussed the way Mercury represents, just as Uranus does, the cosmic ethers, and thus the centers of power upon the cosmic ethers, namely the triad and monad. How Venus is conducting the energy of the soul, and the Earth represents the mental unit, and this is a divine triplicity representing the three periodical vehicles, the three rays, the three periodical vehicles, the three planets. Now let's see, where are we? The resultant effect, just as the human being, in the human being, the physical body, is the effect of the governing rays, working through, I suppose, the atomic triangle, let us say, working through the atomic triangle. Though through the planets, certain potencies manifest, and what he's been discussing here with us, it is planetary potencies and zodiacal potencies. These are 3 in number, and I might here point out that the sacred planets, so-called, he calls them that very often, they have achieved a certain initiatory status, a kind of 5th initiation, I think maybe of a minor kind. I think that Venus, the Earth has not yet achieved its 5th initiation of this minor kind. It is not a sacred planet. Venus, I believe, has achieved the 5th initiation of a minor kind, even though maybe not the 5th cosmic initiation, and is a sacred planet. So he says, I might here point out that the sacred planets, so-called, are those ray potencies which are expressive of soul and spirit. So 2 types of rays express for the sacred planets. Okay, the solar Petries. And perhaps two types of rays express, it says, with the personality ray of the great informing life, the planetary logos subordinated to the two higher rays, such as is the case with man after the third initiation. For him, the personality life is subordinated to the life and influence of the soul and spirit. Thus it is for Venus and the other sacred planets. But a non-sacred planet such as the Earth is still subject to the ray of the personality of the informing life. And this is an important statement here, and the correspondence to the esoteric monadic ray is non-effective. Of course, you wonder, when he uses this, does he mean that the monadic ray is to be considered esoteric, or does he mean that there is an esoteric monadic ray and perhaps a non-esoteric monadic ray? We do believe lately that there are two monadic rays. One, I think, relating to the monadic level per se, and the other related to the logoic plane. But this is the point: the esoteric ray, which presumably, let us just say, is the monadic ray, is non-effective, and the personality is not subordinated to the rays of the spirit and soul. Spirit and soul. Okay. So let's look at that again. Still subject to the ray of the personality. We are still very much subject to our third ray personality upon this planet. And we are trying to eventually achieve our third initiation, where we will no longer be subject to that, or perhaps simply the fifth of the lesser initiations will be sufficient to make us no longer subject to the ray of the personality. The emergence of the second ray soul of our planet, engineered, or should we say encouraged by the reappearance of the Christ and the externalization of the hierarchy, will do much to bring the personality ray of our planet into a lower profile, and the soul ray of our planet will be emerging. How long this will take, we cannot say. That's all in the divine plan. Will the greater age of Aquarius be sufficient for that emergence? I would say that the lesser age of Aquarius may not be entirely sufficient. That's only another 2,300 years, perhaps. Indirectly, Gemini is ruled by the rays transmitting those potencies which, with Gemini, constitute the Mutable Cross. And we remember that indirect rulership has to do with the other signs which are on the same cross as the sign that we are focused upon. And these are the moon, which is the esoteric ruler of Virgo, the Jupiter, which is the orthodox ruler of Sagittarius and Pisces, and also the hierarchical ruler of Virgo. Mars, the hierarchical ruler of Sagittarius. I guess he's including the hierarchical rulers here, it looks like it. And Pluto, the esoteric and hierarchical ruler of Pisces. Yeah, so I think he's included them all, in addition, of course, to what he's been discussing, namely Venus, Mercury, and the Earth. Such are the rulers of the Mutable Cross. They transmit energies expressive of the fourth, that is the moon, the second, Jupiter, the sixth, Mars, the first, Pluto, rays. They transmit energies expressive of the fourth second, sixth, and first rays. Do they transmit actually the rays themselves or energies which are attuned to those rays? This is a question we might ask. Are the energies transmitted those of the rays themselves or those attuned to the rays? Expressive of is the interesting kind of term used here. Only one ray is therefore lacking where Gemini is concerned, and that is the seventh ray. But we have to ask whether this seventh ray would not also be lacking as a direct or indirect influence of any of the other signs of the zodiac. Basically, the seventh ray is lacking on this mutable cross. And even if we include the planets veiled by the moon, namely Vulcan and Neptune, we do not find the seventh ray prominent, though Vulcan will be related to the mineral kingdom, of course, and Jupiter has its ceremonial seventh ray side to it. So only one ray is therefore lacking where Gemini is concerned, and that is the seventh ray of organization, ceremonial magic, and ritual. Sometimes he scatters through the books the names of the rays, and they are names other than those with which we are most familiar, and they are very revealing. For the second ray, for instance, the ray of attractive coherency. Important idea. And I think I ran into one on the seventh ray the other day. That's what triggered this, but I can't remember it at the moment. This accounts for the instability and fluidity of the Gemini influence. In other words, if there were a planetary ray connected with the Mutable Cross, and especially connected directly with Gemini, then the fluidity and instability of the Gemini influence would be greatly modified. So if there were a seventh ray planetarily mediated and connected directly or indirectly with Gemini, the mutability would be less. Less instability, less fluidity, although sometimes when you're looking at the Gemini glyph, you look at the pillars and they are planted in the ground, they are firm, they are enduring, they're not going anywhere. They are the pillars of Hercules, and you have to pass through them to enter the mysteries. So there is kind of a latent seventh ray influence in relation to Gemini, because the seventh ray is always known as the pillar, or the upholding pillar, the one that makes the building firm. But anyway, considering the normal use and expression of the rays, the seventh ray is missing. This absence of the seventh ray accounts for the instability and fluidity of the Gemini influence, and is largely responsible for the frequent failure of the Gemini person to express the beauty, ideals, etc., which are sensed so that they materialize upon the physical plane. Of course, we have seen, Gemini people who have been very successful somehow in manifesting, and oftentimes a moderating influence is present. But you would also wonder as well, what about the other signs on the Mutable Cross? Are they less capable of bringing about materialization upon the physical plane? Because DK seems to allow here both direct and indirect influences. If there were an indirect influence on the Mutable Cross, he would consider it related to Gemini. So can we say this of the Virgo individual? Well, you kind of wonder, with Virgo being prominent in the last or third phase of the previous solar system, whether there was not a strong identification of the constellation Virgo with the third and seventh ray at that time. Because it was, in a way, a third ray solar system, and the seventh ray is an aspect of that third ray very related to it. Okay. So anyway, there is a difficulty for the Gemini person, he says in general, to bring through and express the beauty and ideals which are sensed, so that they actually materialize upon the physical plane. It's an expression of the idea, let instability do its work, and we know that above all, to manifest, to materialize, a stability of the foundation and the structure is needed. The seventh ray produces fixation upon the exoteric level of experience. What an important idea that is. And anchors, if I may so use such a term, the ray forces into form. A very important idea. The seventh ray anchors the ray forces into form. Of course, we look at the pillars again of Gemini, and there is an anchoring of the great pairs of opposites. They can be considered either horizontal or vertical, producing concrete expression of the subjective realities or powers. And we do remember that Gemini, along with Taurus and Aries, is one of the subjective signs, the three subjective signs which prepare for manifestation prior to the manifesting experience in Cancer. 6 forces meet in Gemini, and for this reason, the double triangle or King Solomon's seal is one of the subjective symbols of this sign. And you have to wonder again, if 6 forces meet in Gemini, do they not also meet in every constellation or sign of the cardinal cross? And would the 6-pointed star then not be one of the important symbols of either one? I mean, you look at Virgo, it's connected with the monadic plane, the 6th plane. Pisces also, the father's home, I leave the father's home and turning back I say, the monad goes forth, is also connected with the number 6. Sagittarius has more 6th ray than any other sign in this world period. So that 6-pointed star may be connected with all of these, but particularly DK is talking about it in terms of Gemini, the double triangle, or the idea of the interpenetration of the opposites. Each triangle represents one of the opposites, and they interpenetrate, producing King Solomon's seal. The double triangle is one of the subjective symbols of this sign. It doesn't say it's not of the others. Linking it again with the Masonic tradition. Well, you know, the King Solomon has a large role in Masonry as presently constituted, and the Temple of Solomon is considered to be the causal body, and King Solomon is a strong figure within the Masonic dramas and allegories. Linking it again with the Masonic tradition and indicating also the essential dualism of this sign, because it's a double triangle. It's the fact that it's a double triangle that indicates the dualism. The double, triangle indicates the dualism. So if we really look at the 6-pointed star, sometimes the monad is considered its expression to be through Atma and Buddhi. It's a duality. And there is a sense in which Gemini will link all the pairs of opposites, including spirit and matter, eventually, not just soul and personality, but monad or spirit and the soul-infused personality, essentially spirit and matter. So I think we see the monadic destiny related to this sign. I'm thinking about also the 7th initiation and its connection with Gemini and the exalted monad in that initiation, but of course that is a more logoic happening. So anyway, King Solomon's seal, one of the subjective symbols of the sign, the 6-pointed star, important in the Masonic tradition, as King Solomon is important and as Gemini is important, bringing in the Syrian influence. And since Masonry is in a way the reflection of the mysteries of the Great White Lodge here and also on the star Sirius. Since Sirius and Gemini are connected, there is a kind of relationship then between Sirius, Gemini, and Masonry. All the inner potencies are therefore present, and only the stabilizing seventh ray is omitted. Seventh ray energy is omitted from the dowry. It's almost as if after a marriage you receive a dowry. Maybe we are all in the role here of the perhaps female to be met by the male spirit, and a dowry is given. We are not dowered with the seventh ray. It is omitted from the dowry of the man born in Gemini, or I have to add, until I know better, any of the other mutable signs. Although the Jupiter connection there with Sagittarius and with Pisces would bring in some of the seventh ray, yes. And no Uranian connection, particularly. Actually, Jupiter is found in all the other three signs of the fixed cross, bringing in an aspect of the seventh ray through ceremonial worship. And Gemini also has a special relationship to Jupiter as well. It's not a rulership position, but it's a very strong second ray position, uniting, as he will show us, the spirit with the soul. Thus, we can easily account for the versatility of the Gemini subject because the factor of anchorage is not present. So it's hard to lift an anchor, and let's just say the purpose of anchors is to make mobility impossible. So you are anchored, you are tethered, you are confined to a certain space, and the ship or the individual or whatever may be the item or entity cannot move beyond a certain radius. All right. The effectiveness of Mercury is also enhanced in its interpretive aspect. And interpretation is one of the factors related to the third ray. I come back to the idea that essentially the third ray has a strong relationship to Mercury, both in its personality and possibly, or even probably, in its major monadic ray. The effectiveness of Mercury is also enhanced in its interpretive aspect, explaining one thing to another, understanding A, understanding B, and being able to explain A to B and B to A in terms that each can understand. Because the Gemini person can always find points of contact with people on nearly every other ray. I mean, is he saying that the Gemini person cannot find points of contact with those on the seventh ray? Well, I've seen in practical experience that this is not the case. He may be leaving something out here, but we've seen Gemini people with personality rays of all kinds. First ray, second ray, fourth ray, fifth ray, sixth ray, even seventh ray. And of course, I shouldn't leave out the third ray. I just haven't seen it, but of course it's very reasonable that people can be found in their personalities on the third ray when Gemini is a prominent sign in the chart. So what is interpretation? You know, there's a lack of, given the language of the individual doing the interpreting and given the item to be interpreted, we have to place that item to be interpreted in the language understood by the interpreter or by those for whom or to whom the interpreter speaks. So there is enough Mercury here to understand the common ground or the possible commonalities between the two factors, the unknown factor to be interpreted and the interpreting agent, or the one to receive the interpretation. So Gemini can find much to, as we say, relate to in all kinds of points of contact. Let instability do its work, but that instability assures multiple contacts. So here we have the assurance of multiple contacts. This is an interesting point to remember if you will realize that the great Masonic ritual was inaugurated under the influence of this sign. How long ago we may not know, and whether it was under the influence of the 25,000-year period or a 2,500-year period of 2,160, we do not know, but it is long ago. As that the Masonic ritual reflecting the rites of initiation would certainly have to have been given to humanity in the Middle Atlantean period when the doors of initiation were open. And probably other kinds of initiations were possible even in Lemurian times. So Masonry has changed its outer garb many times, but the basic idea of leading the human candidate through the process of initiation, opening the doors to wider life, has always been there. And yet, interestingly enough, the ray of ritual was omitted, the seventh ray as the ray of ritual. Interestingly, there is a contrast between the ray of magic, sometimes called the third ray, but often the seventh, and the ray of ritual, which is always the seventh ray and almost never the third. This is due to the fact of reaction producing opposition and therefore interplay and struggle. So working against stability, anchorage, how would we say, manifestation physically. So this spirit of opposition has caused the engagement between the pairs of opposites rather than their blending and their concretion. When things are fighting, aspects are fighting, it's hard to anchor anything. A battlefield is not the place to build. As a matter of fact, things are destroyed on a battlefield. Hence the tests and trials of the Masonic procedure, because as we go through the degrees of Mason, we are always tested. It's a reflection of being tested in the process of initiation. But of course, in the forthcoming age, the mysteries, at least concerning the first and second degree, will be definitely anchored upon our planet. But then again, we have the appearance of the seventh ray simultaneously with Aquarius, which is a sign whose rulers carry seventh ray, both Uranus and Jupiter. And the moon, interestingly enough, is connected with the creative hierarchy that is found on the seventh plane. So the opportunity for anchorage will be there, and the anchoring of the Masonic ceremonies and ceremonies in the church and even in the esoteric education organizations will occur. Reaction producing opposition and therefore interplay and struggle. As I say, it's not the pattern of that which is to manifest. The battlefield is a poor place for lasting manifestation. You have to win the battle first, and then the manifestation can occur. Taurus is the builder and Scorpio the destroyer. If you build on the battlefield, what you build may well be destroyed. And probably for Masonry over the years, it has been the case. The indirect influence of the moon, as it symbolically embodies the fourth ray of harmony through conflict, because it does not really embody it. DK has said that there is no radiation from the moon. There may be some sort of effluvious emanation, which is more the result of decomposition, but there is no true living radiation from the moon. But it may, as I say, have said, symbolize another non-sacred fourth ray planet which it veils. So the indirect influence of the moon, as it symbolically embodies the fourth ray of harmony through conflict, provides Mercury with the dual tendency to struggle. So let's just say the moon reinforces Mercury's tendency to struggle, and which is characteristic of this sign. Indirect influences count, and they have an effect upon the more direct influences of the sign itself. Just like Mercury's tendency to struggle would have an indirect influence upon the Virgo individual for whom the moon was a direct influence. And also the dual tendency to harmony, which is the inevitable result of all spiritual conflict. So what begins with conflict ends in harmony when the fourth ray is at work. What begins, that's burning grounds, sorry, in conflict ends in harmony when the fourth ray is involved, which is characteristic of this sign, and also the dual tendency to harmony through both the moon and Mercury, which is an inevitable result of all spiritual conflict. But, we don't have harmony leading to conflict. We have conflict leading to harmony, unless the harmony is extremely superficial and no lasting harmony at all, some kind of false harmony which needs to be disrupted by conflict. Well, maybe I should say that even high levels of harmony can only last forever if there are to be new factors beyond the present ring past knot incorporated. That will cause, again, a spiritual conflict which has to be resolved. So every new engagement, even if harmony is immediately sought, will lead to some temporary frictions and adjustments. All right, we're on page 365. In connection with the duality of conflict, you should bear in mind that there is a conflict of the evolutionary process. There's always the backward drag, isn't there? There's always the tendency to stasis and rotary motion, leading finally to the conflict of the path. Well, there's the conflict induced by desire, we might say, and simply by the need to survive. Induced by desire and also by the need, because on this planet, the individual, even the animal, must protect himself from the incursions of the environment, and this inevitably leads to conflict simply by the fact of attempting to stay in the body. There is the struggle, the struggle to find sustenance, or shelter, food, shelter, clothing. This is built into the nature of our planet. So conflict will always be characteristic of the individual working within the personality, and it will lead eventually to a higher type of conflict upon the path. By that time, many of the outer conflicts will be solved. Man will have mastered his environment and not be threatened by it. So then conflict moves into the soul personality phase. We have a stable personality by this time. It has its own desires, its own will, its own mastery of the outer world and the ability to fulfill its desires, but then another center of energy swings into orbit and begins to exert its pulls, its magnetism upon the fairly stabilized personality, and another exchange is induced with inevitable frictions coming because the qualities of the contending poles are quite different and need to adjust to each other, first frictionally and then intelligently. So every time you want to incorporate something new beyond the presently achieved ring past knot, there's going to be a phase of engagement which can be a conflicted phase, and certainly will be a period of adjustment. These are the two aspects of struggle. Unconscious under the direction of form it's pretty much, let's call it here, instinctual survival. Simply to stay on the earth, and the fear of not staying on the earth, the fear of disappearing, the fear of non-being, of annihilation. And conscious under the direction of the soul, where we can actually see the directions that we are being pulled in, one towards the comforts of form and the apparent protection or veiling of the form, which veils us from the intruding spiritual forces. We have here what's sometimes called the repression of the sublime, or even the suppression of the sublime. Even though it's wonderful, we don't want it because it disrupts us and calls for work and calls for an experience of duality, which is painful. We want to avoid pain, so until the pain of confinement becomes greater than the pain of engagement. But we give in eventually to the higher pull, because the spirit will not tolerate confinement in that which it is not and as that which it is not. So these are two aspects of struggle: the unconscious animal struggle and the conscious human struggle. Let's call it that. The conscious human struggle. Under the direction of the soul, we know what's at stake. We know the possible gains of freedom. We know what the personality can do. We know what the soul wants the individual to do. And we have to make a decision concerning which side or which one of the pairs of opposites we will emphasize. Where will we place our energy, direct our energy? There is also the harmonizing of the personality and the achievement of personality integration. So first he's talking about conflicts. So the first one, two aspects of conflict, conscious and unconscious. So first a discussion of the two aspects of conflict. Now, as conflict leads inevitably to harmony, he will discuss the methods and fields of harmony. There's also the harmonizing of the personality and the achieving of personality integration. As DK has told us, the personality is for so long a time a scene of internecine warfare, fighting the personality is fighting within itself. The different factors are fighting within themselves. I'm going to, had to look here at my other computer for a moment, just to see whether it was really functioning as it should. And it wasn't. Okay. So the harmonizing of the personality, the warfare with the environment is over, and the warfare between the aspects of personality is over. And then this is an initial phase, and this is the consequence or goal of the first conflict with the environment. And then there is the attaining of harmony between soul and form, which is the consequence of the interaction, the conflicted interaction between soul and personality. This is arrived at by struggle upon the final stages of the path. So two modes of conflict and two modes of harmonization. Okay. Right. Thus again, the essential dualism, that seems to be the major message for us. The essential dualism of this sign behind all dualism on our planet and inducing the struggles that arise because of dualism which needs to be reconciled. Thus, again, the essential dualism of this sign becomes apparent. Now, when the Jupiter influence becomes strong and powerful in this sign, and remember, in ordinary astrology it isn't, it's in the sign of its detriment. Gemini, in the beginning, is a very mental sign connected with the concrete mind, and Jupiter has a much more expansive, love-filled type of expression, an integrative type of expression, not a mentally fragmenting type of expression. So Gemini is not considered to be a wonderful atmosphere in which Jupiter can express. But later, there is so much of the second ray in Jupiter, so much of the second ray in Gemini, that they have a natural attraction for each other. And so Jupiter gives a very powerful type of expression when in the Geminian field. So when the Jupiter influence becomes strong and powerful in this sign, it indicates the initiate, not everybody who has Jupiter in Gemini, but it can be the sign of the initiate, and the rapidly attained dualism in synthesis of soul and spirit. I love that phrase. There is the interplay of soul and spirit, and the two poles of soul, or soul-infused personality, and spirit are not really separate, because they have recognized themselves as united in a prevailing synthesis. So this has everything to do with the higher realms, with the monad and triad. In a way, the triad is the higher ego, so eventually Jupiter has to unite the monad and the spiritual triad, just as Mercury unites the soul and the personality. That's an interesting idea. The spiritual triad is the personality of the monad, and so Jupiter plays the uniting function between these two, just as Mercury does for the soul and personality. All right, so dualism in synthesis, not real separation at all. And the higher initiate will have to unite soul and spirit, but we have to remember that soul, as we normally consider it, will disappear, and soul will become the triad. So in a way, what we call soul merges into the higher ego, which plays the role of the personality in relation to the monad or spirit. And there, Jupiter brings about that particular union. However, on a lower turn of the spiral here, through the activity of Mercury, the man whose sun is in Gemini is aided to attain the synthesis of soul and form. And this is a familiar idea. We're looking for the way of bringing the soul and personality together, the personality being the form. Gemini is Mercury is very useful there, but so is the esoteric ruler Venus, with its magnetic power to draw the two together. And here Mercury can also connect with the concrete mind around which is built the personality, and Venus with the soul. Anyway, it's somewhat through the activity of Mercury, and let's just say and with the addition of Venus, the man whose sun is in Gemini is aided to attain the synthesis of soul and form through the activity of Jupiter, the man whose rising sign is Gemini. And this is an unusual expression and relation. It's not all that have Gemini rising that are in this type of position to achieve the synthesis of spirit and soul, but some, and some I know. Through the activity of Jupiter, the man whose rising sign is in Gemini is enabled to attain the conscious integration of soul and spirit. This is one of the most important practical statements about the higher form of astrology. So dualism and synthesis of soul and spirit. This fluid interplay between two domains which are recognized as being part of the same unity or further synthesis. And he's even related it to what the Sun and Gemini person can do and what is the potential for the Jupiter and Gemini person. Just imagine a person with Gemini rising, the ascendant Gemini, and Jupiter in Gemini, perhaps on the ascendant or in the 12th house. The union of spirit and soul would be greatly promoted. So what we have to do is we have to look at where people are on the path and try to divine or interpret their next step, and they will internally know what it is, I would say, often. And then look at the horoscope and see how it is that the placements within the horoscope can facilitate this next step, and then try to draw people's attention to what the horoscope can do for them. That is what we would like to be able to do, so that people can use the horoscope really esoterically and spiritually and recognize potentials that they did not recognize before, which will enable them to take their next integrative step. Note these 2 points, for they are of real significance. Now you kind of wonder, again, whether we couldn't go through all the signs and look at the sun sign, rising sign, and look at the two different kinds of potentials that are present. Always with the sun sign, there could be a reaching towards the soul. Always with the rising sign, which indicates the soul, there could be a reaching towards the spirit. Maybe, someone could do that. I don't want to hazard that right now, but I can even think of it with Aries rising. Let's say the sun in Aries gives a chance for the assertive approach to soul personality alignment and direction of personality by the soul, authoritative direction. Rising sign, no, but what would we look for? Would we look for Uranus in the case of the rising sign, because it's the hierarchical ruler, or would we look for the esoteric ruler? The esoteric ruler can facilitate the merging of soul and personality, and so even the esoteric ruler of the sun sign, Mercury, would facilitate this merging of soul and personality. The hierarchical ruler of the Aries rising sign would be Uranus, and it would facilitate the approach to electric fire and would blend the soul experience with the experience of spirit. The Uranus is the home of electric fire, and it would be a great facilitator to the merging. It would create this intrusive spiritual power, intrusive into the domain of the soul. Well, all of that could be worked out step by step. It wouldn't come out exactly as it is here in Gemini, because remember that Jupiter is not really a ruler of Gemini. So what do we consult? I mean, if we're working with Aries, we have the hierarchical ruler, esoteric ruler, etc. But we're not given such a planet as Jupiter is in relation to Gemini. There are three rulers of Gemini, and then we have Jupiter. And yet it's said to facilitate the monad spirit-soul integration. So, is there such a planet for every sign that is not one of the rulers, or can the two higher types of rulers be used? I guess, the main point and the simple point is to discriminate between what you can do when your sun is in a certain sign and what more you can do when your rising sign is in that particular sign. So, people with sun in Cancer maybe have different objectives than those with rising sign Cancer and so forth. Note these 2 points, for they are of real significance. The conflict which produces these stages in consciousness. I want to make sure that this Venus here is... these stages in consciousness is fostered by the indirect influence of the planet Mars. Different necessary phases in each one of these processes may be fostered by indirect influences. Mars has not too much to do with Gemini. As a matter of fact, Gemini brought the angels and Sagittarius brought the animal. But here is that the ruler of the lunar lords in Sagittarius, it is Mars, and it is inducing a necessary conflict. So the stages in consciousness which fuse and which follow the conflict are induced by the conflict-generating planet Mars. So how can we put that? Mars generates the conflicts which have to be resolved in the ways discussed above. It all starts with conflict and leads to resolution, so you need an instigator of conflict if the process is going to be successful. Mars carries the war to the very depths of circumstance. In a way, this is very scorpionic. Mars carries the war to the very depths of circumstance, very scorpionic, because in Scorpio you have to prove yourself on all three levels. It's one of those M signs and represents the three aspects which are found manifesting in matter. So Mars carries the war to the very depths of circumstance, environment, and being. Conflict occurs everywhere. Okay, conflict occurring in all aspects of the human being, and confers at the same time such devotion to the visioned objective as seen at that particular point upon the path, because every different point upon the path will show a different vision and a different objective, that final failure is rendered impossible. This is one of the great virtues of Mars, right? Great virtues of Mars to render final failure impossible. Like, Mars never taking no for an answer and driving forward until all has been achieved. The devotion to completion, the devotion to destiny, the devotion to the archetype and to the achievement of that which purpose indicates as necessary. So we've been talking about the virtue of conflict. The conflict with the environment leads to harmonization with the environment and integrated personality. The conflict with soul leads to integration with the soul and personality, and even, I suppose, Mars may be involved in inducing a conflict between the soul that wants to express itself and the spirit that demands something else in line with the purpose. Maybe Mars is helpful there as well. These are great deities, after all, and even though we call them non-sacred, we have to realize that they've gone through initiations which are far beyond the possibility of any human being. Towards the end of the evolutionary process, the disciple begins to respond consciously to the fourth indirect influence. So this is good. He's giving us kind of a sequential sense, giving us a sequential sense of how to use the indirect influences. The disciple begins to respond consciously to the fourth indirect influence. The first one, what was the first one here? So, well, certainly Mars is one, and I suppose the Moon is one. Jupiter is another, so he's telling us how Jupiter works in connection with Gemini. Mercury is another. Indirect influences come from Virgo, so they are the Moon and Jupiter. Coming from Sagittarius, they are the Earth and Mars, which he's dealing with now. Coming from Pisces, they are Pluto. So here we are. The disciple, towards the end of the evolutionary process, and I suppose as we are approaching the higher initiation's fourth or fifth degree, the disciple begins to respond consciously to the fourth indirect influence, begins to respond consciously to the fourth indirect influence, that of Pluto, producing the death of the hindering factors. What a way to think of Pluto. How marvelous. You know, Pluto's bringing death, but of course death to death. Death to that which holds us in the type of consciousness which is deadly. Death to the hindering factors, a beautiful description here. And all that prevents synthesis. So there are many separative factors that seem to divide, and Pluto destroys the hindering separative factors. Pluto destroys the hindering separative factors. So when we deal with Pluto, we may be finding that we are on the threshold of a great coming together. Jupiter, of course, is that coming together. It's a planet of synthesis, and I'm thinking of Jupiter-Pluto, you know, Pluto-Jupiter. How Jupiter represents abstraction into the higher life and even onto the astral plane and a more freer type of life, and how Pluto, the planet of death, prepares us for that. It's almost as if Pluto always precedes Jupiter. So Pluto preceding Jupiter is one example. Pluto, as it affects Gemini, as an indirect influence, brings about the death or the finish of the separative instinctual nature, for this is the factor which lies behind all dualism. So if the instinctual nature were not pulling in a reactionary direction, there would be no battle with the higher magnetism. So puts to death that retrogressive tendency which makes us pull away from the type of absorption into divinity which is desirable and which is promised. Yes, the finish of the separative instinctual nature. That's quite lunar in a way, and also related somewhat to the Earth with its very material tendencies. And so in Pisces, it's Pluto cutting the thread which binds the two opposing lives together, but also making possible their merging. It is inherent in what the secret doctrine calls the principle of ahankara, or ahamkara, I guess, or the awareness of the separative, isolated ego. So, how interesting, Pluto is killing the sense of the separative, isolated ego. I usually like to write that with a capital, although DK so often writes it in lowercase and means the same thing. The ahamkara principle, the lower Leo, pulls away from the unitive consciousness, which is higher Leo, or we have the same thing involved in Gemini. The lower brother pulling away from the higher brother, who has the greater vision and the greater participation in unity. So the ahamkara is inimical for eons to the aspiration of the imprisoned soul. So it ahamkara holds us in a sense of false identity. It is inimical for eons to the aspiration of the imprisoned soul, focused within or identified with some aspect of the personality. The soul should not be identified with any aspect of the personality, but only with itself, and even more later with the spirit. The soul is, after all, only consciousness, so with what is consciousness identified? Is it identified with the temporary vehicle we call the personality, or with a temporary vehicle we call the egoic lotus of the soul body, or can soul, in a larger sense, be identified with these larger fields we call triadal, or even with the monadic field itself? The soul does not really disappear, only the encapsulation of the soul on the higher mental plane disappears. That's what disappears. It is inimical for eons to the aspiration of the imprisoned soul, focused within or identified with some aspect of the personality, and in a later stage with the personality itself. But in either case, this is imprisonment. Okay, I think we have reached the point where 1 hour has passed. Yes. So, we're going to say the end of Esoteric Astrology Adventure, number 104A, page 336, and beginning of Esoteric Astrology Adventure, number 104B, page 366. DK promised us a more cosmic, subjective view of the energies when he entered Gemini. After all, it has to be a very strong, since he is the messenger, of the hierarchy, one of the major messengers of hierarchy at least. It's really got to be his sign in an important sense. And he promised us this larger overview, and he is delivering, because some of the most abstract interrelations that we have dealt with are being presented in this particular chapter. We'll go on to the next one in just a moment.